welfare reform, the NHS reorganisation and bankers' pay. Welcome to another review of Prime Minister's Questions with me, Freddie Herzog.
And me, Owen Erica.
We kicked off PMQs today with a debate about policing with MP for Newcastle under Lyme saying that policing is on a cliff edge at the moment with cuts in police force recruitments lower than ever. And that the Prime Minister's comments at the election about increasing policemen seem to be completely sort of gone against at the moment. It's just responded in a sort of typical Cameron way by saying the percentage of frontline officers has increased and it was inherited from the last Labour government.
Yeah, and we've got similar responses. You know, this whole response of what we inherited from the Labour government is we do get tired of it. But what I'm actually starting to get tired of now is that Labour are continually asking questions which lead the Tories to come out with Conservatives, you know, we inherited or whatever. It's just getting a bit dull now. It's no longer, for me, a question of constantly hearing, we inherited this, we inherited that. It's why are you consistently asking those questions of the Tories, because it's really getting dull.
It also seems that the Labour backbenchers aren't really in communication with their frontbenchers because the shadow cabinet support now the cuts in policing, whereas the backbenchers clearly don't, and there seems to be this sort of rift in the party.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a real, they could do with a conference actually,
yeah.
Really work out one sort of like policy on this.
Yeah. Then we had the first debate between Miliband and Cameron. There were two in this week's PMQs. And the first question put to Cameron by Miliband was that about banks disclosing details of who is paid over £1 million. So will this information be released now? And this was answered by Cameron saying, we now have the toughest and most transparent regime of any financial centre in the world, with the top 8 executives' pay being released for each bank, which very cleverly Miliband pointed out that there are a lot more than 8 chief executives in charge of banks. And he's sort of, it's another broken promise from the Conservatives, which I kind of agree with, because it's very much, it seems a sort of half-hearted measure. Oh, we'll release a few, but actually there's probably a lot more chief executives that are paid more than £1 million.
Yes. And a lot of times these kind of questions I tend to lose a bit of interest. But what is really fascinating about these points is that tends to be, if you look at what is happening around Cameron, you really learn quite a lot. And the Chancellor was whispering away in Cameron's ear whilst Ed was asking his question. It's just quite Machiavellian. It's quite interesting. It's those little bits that make Prime Minister's questions quite interesting.
Miliband was then asking for an ordinary employee on the pay committee of every bank, which just seems, it's a nice idea, but it seems rather ridiculous.
Cameron made the point of it, you know, employee not, you shouldn't be able to decide your own pay, which effectively is what they should be doing, but there does need to be a look at, you know, someone who, to be able to determine the higher rates.
Yeah.
It's just, it's wrong, but you know, there should be some representation from the lesser ranks, perhaps.
And then Cameron answered by, he sort of ended by saying that Miliband is being hypocritical, in which case John Bercow stood up and said, the use of hypocrisy in relation to a specific member is not parliamentary, so asked the Prime Minister to withdraw his comment. It's quite nice to have John Bercow there to kind of lighten the mood in PMQs.
It was interesting that David Cameron didn't really withdraw the comments. He just sort of, yes, yeah, I would be certainly happy to do that. But it wasn't very sincere, but yeah, I mean, what else would be expected, I suppose.
Then we had some discussion from other MPs, some questions to David Cameron, including trade relations with India, winter fuel payments, and Portsmouth Football Club. And then Miliband stood up again. He seems to like doing this sort of the splitting thing, splitting his arguments.
Interestingly, it's a tactic we didn't see a lot from Brown. I can't remember the last time it was properly used, but yes, it's
almost like he's got to, he'll make one point, argue it, and then he's got to sit down and sort of rethink what he's doing. Anyway, his second point was on the reorganisation of the NHS, which he described as unstable. and he reeled off this massive list of people who apparently aren't in support of it. And he asked, why does the Prime Minister think he has lost the medical profession's trust? And Cameron answered this: Labour is irresponsible, tens of thousands of GPs are behind this. And then the typical Miliband response. Every time he talks about the NHS, he just shows how out of touch he is.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of, I think we're both getting quite fed up with this now. We want something new and different.
Probably it was interesting that Cameron was very keen to deflect away from this. He was quick to get in when, after Ed Miliband asked the question, that Miliband was keen to not talk about the welfare cap, which was going through the vote.
Which has gone through tonight, and went through just, I think there were 100 votes separating for and against. So it has just gone through the NHS bill.
But it did show that Cameron wasn't keen to answer questions on health because he was throwing that mud at Miliband at that point.
He also, throughout PMQs, he kept on almost sort of begging for the support of Labour in the bill on welfare caps to cap benefits to £26,000 a year, and kept on asking, "Are you with us? Are you with us?" It's just almost a sign of desperation from Cameron, really.
Yes, but it seemed to be the only thing he really had as a weapon against Miliband this week, and so he was keen to use it as much as possible.
One area that was quite interesting after the Miliband-Cameron spat this week was the MP for Labour, Dunfermline and West Fife, who asked about Lord Ashcroft getting his peerage on false pretences, and saying, is it just one rule for the Conservatives' friends and another rule for others, with a sort of millionaire cabinet, which I thought was interesting.
The way Cameron responded, he didn't really answer the question. He just made the point that Labour's largest funder is based offshore, but it didn't really address the fact that it's wrong. Neither side should have dodgy fundings. It should all be above board. It's not a question of, oh, they do it so we can do it too. It's both need to be right.
And his final closing statement to a question, I think again on the benefit caps, was they're not flip-flopping, they're just flopping, which I quite liked.
Yes,
it was quite humorous.
Yeah.
So that's it for another review of PMQs. We'll be back next week. I've been Freddie Herzog.
And I've been Owen.